Welcome to City Inside Out. Just ahead, should the University of Washington be allowed to further expand into the neighboring U District? The mayor says it would help revitalize the Ave. Some residents, though, worry it will institutionalize the area even more. We take up that debate today. Jan Drago is one of the leads on this topic for the City Council. She joins us, and later a resident of the area who doesn't like the mayor's UW expansion plan. He is Matt Fox, president of the University District Community Council. Growth at the University of Washington is our focus today, right after the news. Homeland Security finally came to our home this week. Mayor Greg Nichols on Tuesday announced that Seattle will receive an $11 million grant from the federal government for anti-terrorism efforts. Seattle was one of only 7 cities to get what amounts to the first local money for Homeland Security since 9/11. The city was chosen based on a formula that factors in population, perceived threats, and infrastructure, including ports and an aerospace industry. So in addition to being one of the most livable cities in the country, Seattle apparently is also one of the most vulnerable. Hopefully you haven't had a reason to notice, but calls to 911 haven't been getting answered by operators as quickly as they should be. The Seattle Fire Department, which staffs the system, has added personnel to correct the problem. Cutting down answer time doesn't just save lives, it saves the overall service as well. For 911 funding depends on operators answering calls within a specified period. And while we're on the subject of 911, here's a troubling fact, and maybe it's related. Nearly a third of all 911 calls made from cell phones are accidental. Typically, this happens because a phone in a purse or pocket gets bumped, or sometimes young kids get a hold of them. Officials are now asking wireless users not to program 911 into their cell phone speed dial systems. This week, one of the city's citizen panels had some critical words for the mayor's office. The group is the Office of Professional Accountability Review Board. What's that, you ask? Well, the panel of 3 community members provides an independent review of police misconduct investigations. It's a relatively new group, just a year old, and was established by the City Council to give the public assurance that complaints from citizens about police officer behavior are effectively investigated. Board members had a complaint of their own on Monday. They appeared before the council saying that they have not had adequate cooperation from the mayor's office to do their job. Greg Nichols, in response, says that board members are overstepping their mission. Reviewing police misconduct, he says, is the panel's only role. They are not empowered to review overall police-community relations. Here's that back and forth.
While we have initiated 2 brief and cordial meetings with the mayor's Senior Policy Advisor for Police Matters, we've been unable to establish any regular communications link to coordinate the mayor's initiatives on police community relations and the review board's work on police accountability.
The concern I have is that the board is created for a particular purpose, and that's to provide an independent review of how the Office of Professional Accountability operates. And the Office of Professional Accountability really reports to me through the chief. So I'm responsible for and accountable for how the office runs. They're supposed to provide an independent view of how that's working. My sense is that they're going well beyond what the council intended for them to do and really offering advice on how to operate the police department. And I frankly don't think that is their role.
The war in Iraq is settling down, and so too are the street protests here in Seattle. There has been a bit of Monday morning quarterbacking about the local response. Some claim that city police were too harsh with protesters. Others say they were just trying to keep things orderly. It's interesting that protesters this time around aren't quite getting the same sympathy as they have in the past here in protest-friendly Seattle. Jim Compton, who oversees police issues for the council, said recently that clear distinctions are now being made between free speech and disruption.
We learned a lot from the WTO, that it's only a handful of people that disrupt. We have to protect the right of the large number, the 95% that are there for peaceful purposes and whose speech and right to assembly has to be protected. And the other thing I learned from WTO, and it really sticks with me now, is that disruption is not protected speech. That you have a right to express your opinion and express it vigorously, but when you break laws or disrupt orderly operation of society, that goes beyond what the Constitution protects.
We may never have one entity to oversee all six major transit agencies in the region, but soon there's going to be just one system of payment. The King County Council agreed this week to create smart cards for all local transit, buses, trains, and ferries. It will be a seamless fare system. Cards will be rechargeable with a cash value or any fixed period pass. Riders can simply wave them at the fare box upon entering, kind of like a transit debit card. The system should be up and running in 3 years. And now for our Neighborhood Roundup section. Here are some items of note from around the city. First stop, Rainier Valley, where the roads are set to be repaired. A $2 million project to resurface parts of Rainier Avenue South will get underway in the next few weeks. And this from Montlake and other areas in and around 520. A new study shows that toxic heavy metals are flowing off the floating bridge during rainstorms right into Lake Washington. The main culprits: oil, grease, transmission fluid, and even metal shavings from disc brakes. 115,000 cars travel across 520 each day. Some newer bridges, including I-90, do have some modest pollution control measures like runoff catch basins. And while we're on the topic of major roadways, here's an item for anyone along Interstate 5 in Seattle. The state now says that the pavement is way past its useful life and needs to be completely torn up and replaced. Not just resurfaced, mind you, but the existing asphalt totally removed and repoured. Delightful. And here's some good news, though, for West Seattle commuters. The Elliott Bay Water Taxi resumes service towards the end of this month. On April 21st, the boat goes between downtown and West Seattle. And finally, this from the Central District. Spring Spruce Up Day at Garfield Community Center is coming up, but it's not what you think, I suspect. They won't be cleaning up the yards of the area. No, this Spruce Up includes a special benefit for senior citizens: free haircuts, facials, manicures, and massages. It happens on April 25th. The benefits of age. And now for our City Inside Out calendar for the coming weeks. We thought you might want to jot down some of these items. Woodland Park Zoo's annual egg hunt is coming up, open to all. It's on Saturday the 19th. An estimated 50,000 eggs will be up for grabs that day. Next up, the deadline for the Neighborhood Matching Fund. These are city grants for projects that enhance the life of neighborhoods. The deadline for this round of grants is 5 p.m. on Monday, April 21st. Two district council meetings to let you know about. The Greater Jawamish gets together on Wednesday, April 23rd. The group up in Northwest convenes on the 23rd as well. And finally, a forum to announce. The next February, the Seattle Public Schools will go back to voters with a renewal of their building levy. If you would like to learn more about that and help shape the proposal, there is a meeting about that topic on Thursday, April 24th. For more information about any of these events, we're happy to direct you to our website at www.seattlechannel.org. And finally, this item: opening day of Mariners baseball at Safeco Field happened this past Tuesday night. A fine game, but not necessarily one for the history books. But this is, did you know the first professional baseball game in Seattle happened 113 years ago? It was the spring of 1890. The game was played in Madison Park, the Seattles against the Spokanes, and our side won 11-8. By the way, the professional pay back then was about $200 a month. That would buy A-Rod for about a second. And that's it for our news today. Stay with us. Up next, should the city let the University of Washington expand more into the nearby U District? Jan Drago of the council joins us to explain the plan. And later, a critic, the president of the University District Community Council, Matt Fox, visits. Stay with us. City Inside Out is back in a moment. We now welcome Jan Drago. She is chair of the council's Finance, Budget, Business, and Labor Committee. Thanks for being here.
Well, it's good to be here again.
So the mayor has proposed to relax all the restrictions on UW's expansion, allow them to, in effect, build and lease anywhere they want, certainly in the U District. Why is that a good idea?
Well, there's a number of reasons, but starting with the University of Washington is the largest employer in the city of Seattle. It's one of the two largest economic development engines, the other one being the Port of Seattle. We are in economic recession, and there's not much logic to restricting the growth of our two economic development engines. The university brings in more research dollars than any other public university in the United States. Over $750 million come to the University of Washington in research dollars, second only to Johns Hopkins on the private side. And what that means is that each researcher that has a government grant, in essence, is an entrepreneur, a small business person. They receive the call or the letter that their grant has been approved, and all of a sudden they need space within a few short weeks in order to hire people to begin their research, to complete their research within the time period. And because they're associated with the university, they are unable to rent space near the university.
Because of the current restriction.
Correct. And there's no space available on the university campus. So they are forced to rent space all over the city, and then that means they have to commute back to the university to teach their courses, to meet with their students, because most of them are still teaching as well
and
as
need to get back to the central campus.
Right.
Right now, when we say they can't lease in the U district, they can't because the U is at their lid. Now, there's a lot of leasing going on in the U district from the university, but they're capped in effect.
Correct.
And this proposal would allow more. If you look at the history of this lid, the restriction on leasing at the U district by the University of Washington has been in place for almost 2 decades. And every time the universities come up against the ceiling, they've come to the council, and the council's raised the ceiling. So in effect, give them a little more room to lease a little more space and a little more space. Why not just do that again? I mean, if there is some pressure by the university to expand, why not just give them a little more breathing room instead of abandoning this whole framework altogether by scrapping it?
Well, that certainly would be an option, but it's also a lot of process, and there's also no predictability and certainty for the future. And developers, property owners, I mean, you hear over and over again, I mean, they want certainty, that they want predictability. So that's, one of the downsides.
The whole reason for the lease lid is to not have the university overwhelm the U district. I mean, the claim was that if you allow unlimited growth, you'll have university buildings all over the Ave, and it'll in effect institutionalize the area. Why is that argument not still valid? I mean, that was the reason for this original lease lid.
Well, because things have changed, and the university would have to abide by the land use code, and they would be restricted from leasing ground floor space on the Ave. And that space is reserved by land use code in what we call the pedestrian zone to be retail or small service operated businesses. So the U could not lease ground floor. They'd have to lease above.
So the Ave, the argument goes, would still have the character and the pizza shops and the independent booksellers and all that. I mean,
and everybody is in agreement that we don't want to change the character of the Ave. But on the other hand, if you take a look at the Ave today, when I came to Seattle in 1980, Broadway and University Ave were the most vital business districts in the city of Seattle. That's not true today. There is a huge vacancy rate on the Ave. Things have deteriorated. Lots of vacancies. I mean, a lot of people have concerns about going to the Ave. First of all, there's not much parking. they don't want to
Safety
be
concerns.
harassed. Yeah, there's a number of issues. So the way I look at it is, if you want to change, if you want to revitalize a neighborhood, a business district, what you really want to do is bring more people there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. How do you do that? Well, the first thing you want to do is get the people that are already there shopping on the street. The next thing you want to do is make it easy for people, have a reason for them to come and come by transit. And certainly the third thing would be, the more people you have living there, the more they will be shopping, walking, eating at
So
restaurants.
the argument is
on
not
the
just the UW needs a lot more space, but that the U district needs some help. And they've got a lot of vacant space there. They could use some extra life on the streets, some extra people to encourage even more pizza shops and all the rest. I mean, it's a revitalization measure as well.
Absolutely, and timing is everything, and those needs correspond. I mean, if the Ave was fully leased now, I doubt that this lease lid would be getting, much interest from the city.
In other words, because you got some vacant space there, it in effect helps the U's case.
I think
You've got
so.
vacant space, and if things are bustling and perfect at the Ave, it'd be different. How do the university typically, when they've leased in that area, I mean, their businesses and their offices and their research centers and all the rest, the community is interested in housing. I mean, one thing you want to do is put people on the streets, not just during the day, but at night too. How do you encourage, if you lift this lid, how do you encourage the university's expansion to somehow include housing too, something the community wants?
Well, not only does the community want it, the city wants it, because there's been significant job growth in the university area, but there has not been corresponding growth in housing. And there is a demand and there is a need for moderately priced housing in that area. And yes, after the hearing last night, I was thinking and talking to Councilmember Nicastro and our staff people and about what some options might be. And I suggested that we consider how we could incentivize housing in the arrangements that we make with the University of Washington. That maybe there's a way that we tie housing growth to
their expansion.
That's right.
Because I guess the claim is they don't really need housing as their expansion. I mean, their expansion, if you just look at past history, their expansion has not been to build housing units. It's been to build offices and research labs.
But they claim that they need housing for their faculty, particularly the younger faculty.
So this would, you hope, help do that.
Yeah. So I gave direction to develop options that would incentivize housing in this package.
Another claim the community brings up is traffic. If you increase the amount of space the university occupies in that neighborhood, you increase the number of traffic trips, car trips, all the rest in an already clogged area. How can you ensure that won't happen? Well,
you can't ensure that it won't happen, but we can look at the university's track record, certainly Vulcan, Seahawks' track record in terms of their traffic management plans, and they've both been exceedingly successful. So what can we do? We can make sure that Sound Transit gets to the university. I have long advocated for monorail across 520 with a stop at the university downtown and going further west. That would help immensely. So we have to maximize transit. And again, the more people we have living there and walking, the less vehicles there'll be.
With that, we got to close. Thanks for being here.
Okay, thank you.
And this issue is coming up for vote in the next couple weeks.
Probably the beginning of May.
Perfect. Thanks for being here. Jan Drago with the City Council. Stay with us. Next up, a resident of the University District who's not happy about this plan when City Inside Out continues in a moment. We now welcome Matt Fox. He is the president of the University District Community Council. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Let me just start out by asking, what is your view of the Ave? Is it in decline? Is it fine?
Well, I think the Ave needs help, but I think, most of the neighborhood commercial districts in the city are suffering right now. There's a new cover article in The Stranger about how Broadway's having a lot of problems. The International District says that they're having the same kind of things. And I think a lot of that's due to sort of larger trends, that people have started doing most of their shopping at malls instead of the neighborhood commercial districts as destination retail. With that said, though, I've lived on University Way on and off since about 1987, give or take, and every 3 years the Ave is dying. And in fact, someone who precedes me in the U District, I heard them talking yesterday about how when they built the Safeco building in the early mid-'70s, it was touted as the thing that was going to save the Ave. So we hear this discussion fairly often in the neighborhood.
The university needs more space. The Ave and the rest of the neighborhood there has vacant space. They could use some more life and more energy. Isn't it a perfect synergy?
Well, it's a misnomer to say, and it's interesting because the mayor's initial pitch was that they were going to fill all the vacant offices above retail space on the Ave. But the truth is, in the University District, most of the vacancy exists in one building, the 45th Street Plaza, which has about 70,000 square feet vacant space. It's a brand new office building just north of 45th. And the university has said, and in fact we've been saying, and we were proved right by the university's own statements, that they're not going to really be developing on the Ave or moving into existing space. If the lease lid is eliminated, and they're not talking about lifting the lease lid, they're talking about eliminating it, it'll result in a lot of new, built-to-suit, institutional office and research space that developers will build in order to try and attract university
and your
tenants.
argument is they won't be on the Ave. They'll be Roosevelt 11th?
They will not be on the Ave. It will largely be to the west of the Ave, Roosevelt 11th, in the area between about 47th and 42nd, where there's neighborhood commercial zoning that would allow them to build pretty much whatever they want.
And your argument for that is that that's past history.
Well, I mean,
that's where they've built so far?
A developer, given other things being equal, developers will build office space before they build residential because it's a lot more profitable. So if you allow the university to rent as much space and have as much space built to suit for them to rent in the university district as, if the sky's the limit, it will, in addition to pushing out existing uses in older buildings, for example, older residences that exist in neighborhood commercial zones now will be under serious pressure to be redeveloped.
But I'm just wondering, why don't you think it's going to happen on the Ave?
Well, it's not. It's because that's not the kind of space.
Shows
that's not the kind of space they need. And their own real estate office said in an interview with the Daily before someone cracked the whip on them and got them back on message that in fact they're not going to be on the Ave and it's not going to be an existing space. They're going to build new leased space.
Well, let me ask you about the changes since the lease lid was really put in effect in a major way in about 1985. Since then, we now have master plans that the university is required to abide by. We have more monitoring programs. We have better zoning codes at the U District and other places, including pedestrian uses on the ground floor. There's design review. There's transportation plans. There's other neighborhood, overlays in effect. My point is, the worry about the university overwhelming the neighborhood, which may have been legitimate back in 1985 when these were implemented, the lease lids, aren't as prominent now, it seems, because you got these layers of protection. Don't you have reason to believe that if you got rid of the lease lid, the university could do anything there? They still have to abide by a whole bunch of community processes and can't build all these kind of things you're talking about.
Well, except that they can, including under those processes. If you look at something like the Roosevelt Commons, which is a reasonable project as those things go, it's a big slab-sided office building, and that was built under the current zoning code with design review, and it's still what it is, and that is something that's fundamentally shifted the scale of that entire corridor. I don't draw a lot of comfort from the idea that the existing zoning will be added to it to protect us, and I'll tell you why for a couple reasons. First off, in the city right now, the code discourages street vacations. Have you ever seen DCLU not grant a major project proponent a street vacation or a sky bridge if they wanted one and spent the time and money to lobby for it? The university has nothing if not time, money, and lobbyists. And we're going to be engaged in constant fights over what the definition of a retail use is, for example. In 1995, the last time the university came up against their lease lid, they wanted to take over the Ave Arcade, which is now the site of Tower Records. And had the university been allowed to take over the Ave Arcade, as DCLU was ready to let them do, Tower Records would not be where it is right now. And that's just a historic fact. In addition, the zoning, since they're not going to be developing on the Ave, and I think it's they've pretty much said that they're not, the pedestrian overlays don't apply. So if you're in a neighborhood commercial zone, there's no requirement that you produce residential. There's no requirement that the street level use be anything but commercial office space, which if you look at the North Ave where they've built mixed use buildings, you get street level spaces on the North Ave in the pedestrian zone that have windows shuttered all day.
Fair enough, but that's not the university's fault. In other words, that's just the underlying zoning. In other words, if you, some of those projects that have been built have not been university projects. They don't have pedestrian friendliness, so they're not.
But if the zoning code can't protect us from regular garden variety developers, how is it going to protect us from a state institution that claims that, you know, essentially the city doesn't have sovereignty over it? I draw no reassurance from that.
You want, as I understand it, the community council and other community councils in the area, they want to liven up the area. They would like more residential life there, more 24-hour life. You could, no one's going to argue, I guess, with more employment. How are you going to get all that if you're going to restrict or not allow your university to grow a little bit more?
You don't get it by eliminating the lease lid, because right now the lease lid is the only thing that the city has that gives it any leverage over the University of Washington with regard to how it develops in the neighborhood. If you eliminate, and it's not just the square footage limit, it's all the things that go with the lease lid. It's the prohibition on the university leasing residentially zoned property. It's a much more narrowly defined prohibition on the university's ability to lease street level space. If those things go away, we are not going to have any leverage over the university to ensure that housing is developed because the economics are such that it won't be.
Right now there's about 100,000 square feet of vacant space in the area, in the U District. If you allow the university to expand, theoretically they could fill up that space before anything new was even built. Is there an argument, and do you support maybe not necessarily getting rid of the lease lid altogether, but at least lifting it, giving them a little more flexibility?
Yeah, the last time the lease lid was lifted was typically the lease lid's lifted about every 10 or 15 years. The last time was actually much more recent. It went up from 400,000 square feet to 550,000 square feet in 1998. And a prohibition, there used to be a prohibition when the university used to lift its lease lid. They used to decrease the amount of space they could build on campus in their master planning. That went away. So now the university is going to build 3 million square feet of campus space, 1 million of which almost will be in the West Campus, which is where the campus really interfaces most with the surrounding neighborhood. Combine that with this sort of unfettered ability to grow, and I think we could have a problem. Now, with regard to the 100,000 square feet of space in the neighborhood, about 68,000 square feet of it is in the 45th Street Plaza. And I think, yes, if there was a limited lease lid lift, you know, where you expanded the square footage, perhaps expanded the area a bit in which they're allowed to lease because there are restraints on that. That's something the community could talk about, but we were never presented that option. We were presented with this all or nothing, my way or the highway, Greg Nichols plan, and nobody's terribly happy about that.
But you're willing to kind of compromise and maybe...
I think that would be perfectly appropriate.
You represent the community council, and many community councils around the area don't approve of the mayor's plan. The business people, however, do. You got Chamber of Commerce, the Business Improvement Association. Is this a real resident versus business?
Well, I think you see that kind of tension in a lot of neighborhoods. I mean, you know, the interests of the residents and the interests of the businesses are not always going to align, and you know that's fine. We work together on other stuff. On this, we beg to differ.
But your view is that if you get rid of this limit, that what you institutionalize the area, you make it less neighborhood friendly.
You create an opportunity.
30 seconds.
You create an opportunity cost that's pretty significant. You will fundamentally shift the economics of the area. You will make it very hard for lower rent uses to survive in the neighborhood. And there's a real opportunity cost in terms of things not built. If developers can build unlimited office space for the university, who are a very attractive tenant, that means commercial and retail uses that don't happen. It means residential uses that don't happen, particularly in the area north of 45th that our neighborhood plan identified as a mixed-use area. That's likely to become an institutional sort of block, and that would be sad.
I got to close there.
Thanks
for being here. Matt Fox is the president of the University District Community Council.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for watching. Join us next week for another edition of City Inside Out, when our topic will be how to deal with dangerous dogs. Until then, on behalf of our talented studio crew here at the program, I'm C.R. Douglas. Thanks for joining us.